I was little, I used to keep a keen eye out for ripples in the dirt, seeping groundwater, half-immersed plants, anything that could be a telltale sign of nature's silent but all too prevalent killer. That's right, we're talking about none other than quicksand. I had a ton of knowledge about quicksand. I mean, it's not surprising. Believe it or not, 3% of all movies in the 1960s featured quicksand in a pivotal role. Now, growing up with parents who didn't exactly encourage anything other than movies from the 60s to the 80s, I had plenty of opportunity to learn everything. I knew where I was most likely to find quicksand right before my adventure ended. I knew how to get out of quicksand with the conveniently placed vine that would be to my right, and how to help other people out of quicksand, namely the love of my life, who I had not yet realized, but would as I pulled them from their certain death. I had plenty of information presented to me by these movies. However, in retrospect, I lacked something very important: context. See, a lot of times we are given a wealth of information from movies, TV shows, books, even social media and the people around us that warp our views of certain life-threatening things like quicksand, but we lack context and a sort of wisdom. It's like the quote goes, knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit, wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad. Something else that's often represented very greatly in media, but often slightly misrepresented, misconstrued, or even entirely falsified, is that of mental health treatment. It's presented a lot, in movies especially. It's a token, but it's frequently misrepresented to the point that when you hear psychiatric ward, mental hospital, or even asylum, there are a lot of things that come to mind. This is due in part to horror movies. They are the classic setting for any horror movie of your worst dreams, and even if they're not, they do tend to demonize people with mental illnesses, an easy target to be a mass murderer, anything you need because they can use mental illness as a crutch. But it isn't just horror movies. Action movies do tend to have a habit of doing the same thing, either just having characters with mental illness misrepresented or even using them as a plot device. Even romantic comedies have this habit, teaching children and even adults that bipolar disorder, depression, anything can be cured if you just find the right guy to sweep you off your feet. Our classics especially are notorious for misrepresenting mental illness, either for comedic purposes or for shock value or horror. Even media that presents itself as biographical, based upon or entirely about true events, true stories, misrepresent what living with a mental illness is like. Now, some of this is just to ramp up ticket sales, and that's understandable. Everything needs to be dramatized for the big screen in Hollywood, right? But this does have long-lasting effects, and it's not just me being embarrassed to talk about my mental health treatment. See, the fact is, while mental health issues are very prevalent, especially in America, we have a horrible view of what treatment looks like. Just like most people in this room probably, when I thought of psych wards, I thought of the classic horror movie, heavily medicated people in straitjackets, a scene out of your worst nightmares, padded rooms. But in August of last year, I was actually admitted to an inpatient psychiatric ward, and so now when I hear the same words, much different and more pastel images come to mind. It's a radically different change, and kind of demystifying what happens in a psychiatric ward, or even just in therapy, psychiatry, where you aren't living in the hospital, is phenomenally important. Not only just to be more educated, but because it takes an average of 10 years for people who have started exhibiting signs of mental health issues to even begin seeking help. This is due in large part both to the stigma associated with having mental illness, not wanting to show a sign of weakness or ask for help, or having a lack of knowledge about what mental health treatment is like, or even what mental health issues you may be suffering from. This number is especially damaging when you consider that you don't always get the help you need at first. There are pretty much levels you have to break through to actually achieve the treatment you need. And the first, I think, is definitely the internet. There's a lot of advice. The second you start wondering, hey, am I maybe depressed or anxious? Am I seeing things I don't know? And a lot of them have to do with gluten causing psychosis. You just need diet and exercise to not be depressed, or eating the right things will cure all of your anxiety problems. Kind of misconstruing what mental health issues are, if there's a chemical imbalance in your brain, or if you are in a detrimental position in your life. Am I covering? No. I thought I was covering part of the screen. Not only that, but even if you do seek what you think are more legitimate means of approach, they may not be right for you. After I told my parents that I was struggling with anxiety, depression, and often suicidal ideations, I got a psychiatrist. It took me a while to get an appointment, but once I was there, it was like magic. I had someone who would actively listen and who understood me. She gave me a prescription for Prozac, which didn't exactly cure everything, but it stabilized the high highs and low lows of emotions that I had been having that I assumed were normal. Shortly after that, she recommended cognitive behavioral therapy, which is what you imagine from a movie, in that it's sitting on a couch talking to a therapist, but beyond that, she wasn't a life-changing guru offering me deep advice and wisdom that I hadn't thought of before, but she also wasn't just sitting looking at me going, and how do you feel about that? It was somewhere in between, offering me coping skills. Sometimes just a ruler to hold myself up to. Is this irrational, or is this like the level of weird that everybody is? And while those are valid health treatment plans, and often enough for some people, for many they're regarded as the first line of treatment when you need a more immediate intervention. Now, I'm a little too young to have waited the average 10 years, but for someone who has waited that long especially, more immediate action is necessary. I realized that this wasn't quite the jump start I needed to begin my recovery and begin my treatment. It was in the middle of the night one night, and it was the lowest point that I've reached to this point. There is nothing more heartbreaking than having to wake your parents up in the middle of the night and telling them that you aren't safe alone anymore, that you really need to talk to someone about this. But there's also nothing better than parents who are willing to sleep in your bed with you until the next morning when you can figure things out. And also, nothing better than having a support team already set up through your psychiatrist and therapist. Now, I happen to be particularly lucky. My therapist saw me free of charge on her lunch break the very next day to discuss my options. And she recommended something that you don't generally think of when you think of mental health treatment, which is the emergency room. Not only that, she didn't recommend me going to the ER in Fayetteville. No, she recommended me going 4 hours away from my home to Chapel Hill's emergency room, which presents kind of an odd situation. You usually think of driving in an ambulance suddenly with your leg cut off, but it was really more like drive home, pack a bag, mostly with socks and underwear, and then take a pre-planned 4-hour road trip to the emergency room. Mental health emergencies don't quite have the outside appearance that you would expect. And once I got there, I have to admit, I was pretty skeptical. When you go into the emergency room, surrounded by people bleeding, coughing, in dire circumstances with ambulances everywhere, you kind of feel like maybe you're overreacting. This is a natural part of the way that the media has made us feel, has trained us to feel about mental health issues. I mean, even a lady behind the front desk checking me in, when I told her I was there for suicidal ideation and would like to be admitted, she seemed bored, almost skeptical. She just went down the token list of questions. Do you have a plan to hurt yourself? Do you have a plan to hurt other people? And do you feel safe right now? When my answer was no to the last question, they took me into the back room. Now, something you have to realize, even though I am advocating for taking advantage of this resource in a crisis situation, is that there is no dignity in the emergency room. The second I went back, I was strip searched. I was given scrubs that were 3 sizes too large for me. I was put in a bedroom next to people who had nothing in common with me. They weren't here for the same reason as me. fact, they were mostly 5-year-olds trying to bite nurses and throw sandwiches at their grandparents. Still not sure why they were in there. I was in a padded room, not like mattresses on the wall like you think of in movie psych wards, but more like really thick yoga mats, which I thought was an ironic homage to everyone who told me yoga would cure my depression. All that was in it was a medical bed for myself and a chair for my mom to sit in, and that she did all night. Every 1 or 2 hours, a new doctor would come in with seemingly no idea of why I was there, ask me the same set of questions, give me a water bottle as a peace offering, and leave. I really didn't feel like I was getting treatment. I felt like I was locked in a closet so I wouldn't hurt myself. By the morning, I was pretty fed up and honestly resentful that my therapist had sent me there. I was going to come back, and if I was going to give a TED Talk on mental health, I was going to tell you all that the emergency room is a scam. All they're doing is locking you in a room until you can't hurt yourself and then taking your money. But just when I was starting to lose both hope and energy, since it's impossible to sleep in a room with no windows, a new doctor came down and told me that I should go ahead and start packing up my few things because there was a room for me upstairs and I was going to be admitted, which confused me because I already had been admitted. I already had a room. I was already talking to doctors. What I didn't realize is that if you talk to local mental health professionals especially, you can find that the majority of emergency rooms or hospitals in the United States are linked to an inpatient, meaning you stay on the premises, psychiatric health program. Now, it was a little confusing at first because, I mean, there are really only two polar opposite ideas of what mental health treatment is like. You've got that you can stay or leave anytime you want. We're having deep philosophical realizations about ourselves and we're all just one big family. And you're probably going to meet your soulmate here. Portrayal given from things like Netflix's To the Bone. And then you have every horror movie from the 60s and 70s ever portraying a psych ward. And in reality, it was neither of those things. It was more like a hotel room, honestly. They took me up there, and once I finished talking to a nurse, who I was told would be my nurse and my psychiatrist, for the whole time, I was an inpatient, and I was told correctly. I had a chance to look around the room, and I found that while it looked the same on the surface, there were just minor changes. Wooden pegs in the furniture instead of screws. The windows didn't have any strings or blinds. Both the doorknobs were slanted down, and towel hooks automatically snapped down, even with just the weight of a towel, to prevent something or someone from being able to hang on it with more than 1 pound of weight. I was only allowed to wear grippy socks, which were pretty great. I mean, you get free fuzzy socks, and scrubs for my first few days. After that, it was just no shoestrings, no drawstrings, no metal zippers. After I had kind of had that initial rundown, I was a bit concerned because everyone seemed to know what they were doing, and I didn't. That's another thing, is I really had no idea, what do you do in a psych ward? Other than, you know, sit in padded rooms in a straitjacket and cry. What exactly are the people here doing, and why do they seem happy? I figured that out the next morning. The first thing is you don't even have to wake up because you automatically hear the vitals cart rolling down the hallway and beeping as everyone gets their blood pressure taken, their temperature taken, and is asked how many times they pooped in the last 24 hours. You're then asked if you're hearing voices, seeing things, and if you feel safe. Near the end of my stay, the answer to the last was always, yes, I did feel safe. Then there were things like hospital food, which actually wasn't bad, but I'm not going to promise that for most inpatient psych programs. The most valuable thing and most treatment-focused thing were the groups in the morning and at night. Especially in the morning, they would ask you your name, how you were feeling, what your goal was for the day, and what packet work you were going to do in the day. Packets were essentially homework for your mental health, giving you coping skills, asking you to verbalize your feelings. My response varied, but it was usually Madison. I'm feeling pretty apprehensive. My goal for today is to quit harboring resentment, to figure out where my fears are coming from, to sleep through the night, different things depending on the day. And then I'd probably do like anxiety packet 3 and depression packet 4. Now, some patients chose not to take advantage of this. They were feeling okay. Their goal for today was to have a good day, and they would do whatever packet work was next on their list. And that's something I would like to emphasize. While it's understandable to not know how to respond to these questions because we are not taught to verbalize our feelings. There's no point in seeking out mental health treatment of this caliber if you aren't willing to work with them. The security is important, but actually being an inpatient or an outpatient therapy or psychiatry or even just talking to your friends or family isn't valuable unless you're willing to put in just as much effort. Be honest about how you're feeling and be honest when you don't know how you're feeling. After that, we would usually have just different day groups, the worst of which I decided from the moment I entered the ward being recreational therapy. Now I get it, not everything is about like talking to a psychiatrist and managing your medication. My favorite times were Sunday movie nights when we stayed up 15 minutes past our bedtime and got ice cream. But recreational therapy was a sham. There was no way that origami or watercolors or coloring was going to solve the fact that when I walked in there, I was scared that I was going to attempt to harm myself or take my own life. The very worst was homemade motivational posters. The second I walked in the hall and saw them, I assured myself that while I needed to play along and do whatever they felt would help my recovery, I wasn't going to stoop as low as to make motivational posters for myself. Here's two that I made that are still hanging on my walls. I caved. Creativity was really encouraged as a way to express your feelings. Even when it wasn't an assignment like recreational therapy, making collages of things that inspired you, featuring Beyonce, and you're only 7 days away from tortillas, full things which helped me get through the day a little bit more. We were encouraged to keep journals. A lot of mine was documenting not only how I felt, but drawing schematics of my room, what the door handles looked like, little details I was worried I would forget. One night when I couldn't sleep at 2 a.m., I just sat out with a nurse, and he taught me how to draw with perspective a little bit better. So it's still pretty bad, but now I have a way to remember what the main floor looked like. With no cameras, phones, computers, anything, I was worried that in a year, in 2 years, I would have no memory of what the hall looked like. That's where I ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner every single day for the 2 weeks that I was in the inpatient ward. Now, my experience there was phenomenally positive. I had some rough nights, some sleepless nights. I had nights where they had to give me medication just to help me stop having a panic attack because I am living in a hospital and cannot get out of this 100-square foot area. But after 2 weeks, I became used to it. I was ready to move forward, and some people weren't. There were what you think of in a psych ward. I don't want to mislead you into thinking it's a happy hotel full of people who were a little sad, but then this really helped them. There were kids flipping tables and chairs after having a conversation with their parents. There were kids who had to be sedated involuntarily by a shot, kept in padded rooms, physically restrained against their will. When one kid tried to escape by pounding on locked doors and lashing out at nurses, they had to bring security guards up. He had his hand on his gun the whole time. But there are two things that you can take away from that. The first is that not everyone is that stereotypical mental health patient who needs to be restrained, who's out of control, who doesn't know how to handle their emotions. But the second is that there are people like that. And it's okay if you are someone like that. The person that I became closest to in the ward, the second she came out from the padded room, after having been sedated, after being held down and carried there, we made a joke about how much she was drooling after they sedated her and told her we had saved her a spot at the dinner table. There is no judgment in the psych ward, and in a lot of ways, that's representative of real life, where we think there will be judgment. There is none. It's a great starting point because you can talk about anything, because I mean, come on, you were just in a table with restraints. I can talk about how horrible I feel sometimes. It creates a safe environment to people who understand you. But I was released from that safe environment on good behavior about 2 weeks later, 2 days after my 17th birthday. Thank you very much. My time there was phenomenally valuable, but it was in a time of crisis. I'm not advocating that we all storm the emergency room the second we have any mental health problems. But demystifying of it helps, and also seeing that it's not some magical place where recovery happens. It's not all, or even mostly, medication-based. A A lot of it is habits that we can build in our daily lives. See, half of you are going to meet the criteria, the diagnosable criteria for a mental illness at some point in your lives. That doesn't mean you have it. That doesn't mean it's chronic. That doesn't mean you'll ever seek treatment for it. But the thing is, even if you're in the lucky half, you're still going to need help at some point in your life. And you don't have to go to psych ward for it, because there are patterns from that you can draw into your own life. The most obvious being structure. You didn't have time to have a panic attack at the psych ward because we had recreational therapy in 15 minutes, then you had a 1-hour window for lunch, or they would take away your cold pizza. Planning out your days in advance, having that sense of structure, organization, and safety is vital. Another is taking care of yourself. I'm not talking about $20 face masks from Lush and bubble baths. I'm talking about dragging yourself out of bed once a week to take a shower, because you really need it. Moving around. I'm not saying running a marathon will cure your depression. I'm saying stand up every once in a while. Let the blood actually get to all the parts of your body, or if you're in bed and can't bring yourself to get up, stretch a little bit. Remind yourself how incredible your body is and all of the things that you can make it do. Clear your mind. I'm not saying you should attend like a hipster yoga meditation class. I'm just saying that being conscientious of your thoughts and being able to verbalize, identify, and be cognizant of what's going through your mind is a large part of mental health treatment, and indeed just getting through the day as a normal person. And the last, and I think most important one, is seeking help, represented by the creepy floating hand. But that is the most important thing, and it's what I learned in the psych ward, because I mean, of course, there you can ask for help. I mean, these people are literally paid to listen to how crazy you feel sometimes, and everyone else has it just as bad or maybe even worse as you. I mean, they're all great. They'll introduce you to people that you and no one else can see, but of course they'll listen to you. But the thing is, even when you're outside of a hospital or therapeutic environment whatsoever, that's what everyone's thinking. Everyone has moments where they feel like no one is going to understand them. No one is going to be able to offer them advice. But it isn't always about seeking advice. What do I do in this situation? Why can't you help me? Why haven't you had the same life experience? It's the fact that you just need someone to talk to. Someone to say that they don't understand, but they love you even though they don't understand. That communication is why I'm still standing here in front of you today. The fact that not only was I allowed to talk to doctors and say, yeah, I'm kind of not safe right now, that I was able to go to my family and tell them that I needed this help. That I was able to go to my friends and tell them what I was going through and get their support, even though some of them had no idea what was really going on inside my head. And that's the most important thing, because advice, solutions, that's not the key to recovery. In fact, I think recovery is a really misleading term. Most mental illnesses can fade but not go away entirely. But the opposite of depression isn't happiness. It's hope. I am not consistently happy. I'm not even happy most of the time. But after my experience, I'm hopeful. And I really think that everyone in this room can be hopeful for their future too. Thank you.